Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, it's Ron Crabtree here. I'm your host for Metapod, and I'm really pleased to get into this topic around what are the skills that an organization needs to master to really be good at supplier performance development and supplier performance management. And I'm really pleased to have Greg Cable with us today. He's part of our Meta expert community and an incredibly great resource with a lot of expertise around procurement in general, but with this whole thing around supplier development is really a passion of his. And here we're really going to try to understand what do we need to prepare our team to really be good at that sort of challenge going into 2025 and beyond. And how does supplier performance impact customer satisfaction, our profits, our sourcing and purchasing advantages and strategy, and also touch on automation and digitization and work, and how that helps us with our supply chain performance. So I think before we get started here, we'll start with the diagnostic. Greg's going to pick 3 different areas of specific expertise and help the audience understand how do we assess current performance, both the organization and our people, and understand, do we have a gap here? Is this a opportunity or a threat for us if we don't do something about it? And then the second half of the podcast, we'll circle back and say, great, so what do we do about them? What are the actions we would take to actually put those things into a state that we need them to be successful going forward? So before we get into that, Greg, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here today, Ron. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone. My name is Greg Cable, and I've been in the manufacturing and supply management business now here for, 35 years. I don't know where the time's gone. My journey began with a degree in industrial engineering. I later got my MBA, got my CPM, Certified Purchasing Manager certification. And I've had the privilege of working for notable companies like John Deere and Continental Aerospace Technologies. At Deere, I led many global teams and projects. In particular, I was the manager of the Center of Business and Process Excellence, and we did hundreds of projects all around the world and saved millions of dollars. At Continental, I was the global director of supply management, and there, in less than a year, we improved on-time delivery by 38%. So for anybody out there listening, it can be done. You just have to make sure you're applying the right techniques. And so currently I work as an independent consultant. I do all sorts of projects, but I particularly enjoy process improvement and MRP related processes. So I'd have to say that as I look back on my career, that it's primarily been focused on improving supplier performance. And it's a passion of mine. I love what I do, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about it.
All right, perfect. So let's get to it then. Let's get to it then with respect to, supplier performance management and development and things like that. Let's get into your diagnostic here, and you could share with us kind of like your 3, if you were, brought in at random and any kind of an organization and just generically, these are 3 things you would probably start with. Get us started with the diagnostic here.
Sure. So one of the things I'm noticing as the baby boomers are retiring, we're losing a lot of knowledge, and you have these new people coming in, and they're good, but they're inexperienced. And these colleges and universities will do a great job at teaching you about, say, logistics, but they don't do a necessarily good job of teaching you how to pick up the phone and talk with the supplier. And I think that's key to good performance with your suppliers. So I think my message today is get back to the basics and make sure that the people coming in and your whole organization are aligned with the basics, because if you do those basics well, I believe you're going to be very successful. So the first diagnostic point is, have you communicated performance expectations, both to your suppliers and internally?
Now, I need to interrupt for a second right there. So let's assume that this is a novice, right? We have,
Sure.
a board member, CEO is not from a purchasing background. What am I looking for? I'm going to walk down the hall and just say, hey, talk to me about how we're communicating supplier performance program.
Yeah.
What are you going to look for? I mean, do we even have one? What's the documentation? What are the what would you be looking for to have evidence that, yes, in fact, we've got that handled, or, whoa, we've got a real problem?
Yeah.
That's probably an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the questions could be asked is very simply, what are the expectations of our suppliers? If a person responds, well, we expect them to have on-time delivery, go a little deeper and say, well, what does that mean to you? What does good quality mean to you? What does good cost reduction mean to you? And it just dive a little bit deeper, and you don't actually have to go very deep before you can see the glaring light. So it's either going to be green or red. They either know it or they don't. And so I think that's a really good test in terms of diagnosing whether they have those good performance expectations. When I talk about performance expectations, what I mean is, is the supplier, do they know how to perform on cost, delivery, and quality? That's really the question. Do they even know what your expectations are?
And would you have, feedback, measurements, leading trailing indicators? What would be the metrics or the controls that you'd be looking for to determine whether or not we actually have a good program in place?
Well, I think in terms of metrics, it's really asking the question, asking your employees, what is the on-time delivery of our suppliers?
And what's the trend looking like?
And what's the trend? Yeah. What's the quality, and what's the quality metric coming out of our suppliers? So if they measure it, then you have to start digging a little deeper. Well, what does on time mean to you? And that's one of the things that I'll be talking about here a bit later. But for some people, on time means, hey, it doesn't matter if you get it here 3 months early. I don't care, as long as it's not late. So that causes, of course, all sorts of inventory issues. You really have to define what these key metrics mean to the organization,
and then ensure that they're communicated effectively and supported with ongoing practical communications. So it's really clear what suppliers expect. So thank you for that. So what would be the second diagnostic you'd want to get into?
Well, I think once those performance expectations are defined, then the question is, are you providing feedback to the supplier? So let's say you're gathering all this information and the supplier's doing a horrible job. Let's say they're at 50% on-time delivery. Well, they're just sitting back fat, dumb, and happy because they're good, right? You haven't told them anything. So unless you provide that feedback, they're never going to know that they're not performing. They may think they're just fine. Well, I take that back. Their manufacturing facility probably knows they're late. Your contact person in sales may not know that they're late. And so it's providing that feedback, and I think it has to be a verbal connection. It can't just be, hey, send an email. So you send an email and they get it. They may or may not look at it, but if you don't follow up, they're going to think you don't care. And if you don't care, they won't care. So, they say what measures is what gets measured gets done. You've got to measure it, communicate it. And when I say communicate, it's not a one way. It's a back and forth communication. Yeah.
So what would be the evidence you'd be looking for? Again, I'm a novice. I don't know much about the game of running and managing suppliers. So I'm going to walk down the hall and look for something. What's the evidence I'm looking for to suggest we actually have a vital program that's impacting a significant, if not all of our important suppliers? What's the evidence you would go look for?
Yeah. So I think a real easy question might be, how do we provide feedback to the suppliers? Now somebody could make up an answer. Those are probably easy to get around. But when you start hearing those answers, then you can start to dig a little bit deeper and say, well, tell you what, maybe for supplier XYZ, could you show me the notes from the meeting? Can you show me what you talked about? Start having them provide evidence and examples that those meetings are actually taking place. Now, if those meetings are taking place, then perhaps the next question is, okay, hey, I see that their delivery is not very good and you had some discussions around it. How is that going now? And what discussions have you had with the supplier since that time? So those are the types of things that I think you can do to diagnose whether that feedback is actually happening. The other thing, you could pick up the phone and call a supplier. Have we ever talked to you about your performance? If they say no, that's a big red flag.
So what's the consequence, if we're not doing a good job of supplier performance management, what's the risk to the organization?
Well, the risk that I believe is inevitable conflict, either with late deliveries or quality. Let me give you an example. Let's say your teenage daughter is going out on a Friday night, 16 years old. And as she's going out the door, you say, hey, be home at a reasonable time. Well, she says, great, she's out the door. Well, your definition of a reasonable time might be 11 o'clock. Her definition is 2 o'clock. And so when she comes rolling in the door at 2 o'clock and you've been worrying for 3 hours, there's going to be conflict, right? That could have been easily taken care of had that expectation been set up front. So there might have been some conflict up front. She might not have liked that 11 o'clock, but that can be ironed out up front. And so that's, I think, the danger of not providing that feedback is that you will run into conflict, and that conflict could be shutting down the line or giving you quality parts or lawsuits. I mean, it can really snowball.
So it's a practical matter, if I'm the executive walking down the hall, do you have guidelines in terms of what percentage of suppliers would be engaged in meaningful communications around these? Would it be all 100% of our suppliers, or is there kind of a little wicket you would go through to say, there's a way to grade that, or maybe you wouldn't treat all suppliers exactly the same? Do you have any guidance there?
Yeah. So typically I'll go with the 80-20 rule regarding spend. You absolutely, positively must have face-to-face, either on the computer or in person, conversations with the 20% of the spend is suppliers. 80% of the spend.
80% of the spend would be 20%.
20% of the suppliers. That's right. Yep, that's exactly right. Now, the other ones, you might have key suppliers, or you might have some sole source suppliers that from another country, or it's a supplier that there is a particular risk of supply interruption. So you might want to have those types of discussions. If it's a hardware supplier or a common commodity type thing where you can get it anywhere, you know what? It's not as important.
All right, cool. So anything else around providing feedback and collaboration before we move on to the next diagnostic?
One other thing I just wanted to talk about is the collaboration piece of the feedback. Feedback cannot be just one way. There's got to be a give and take. It goes back to my teenager example. When you're talking about 11 o'clock, she might not like the 11 o'clock. You want it to be 11 o'clock, but you have to come to some type of collaboration on what that time needs to be. Now, of course, as a parent, you just tell them what it is. But there's a give and take, especially when it comes to exceptions. When be talking about exceptions to your delivery and quality metrics. How do you deal with exceptions? And there's got to be a lot of collaboration going on with that. So collaboration, it's got to be going both ways.
Perfect. So what would you say be the three common standard, the third common diagnostic that you want to dig into, regardless of the organization?
I think the third, and it could be ranked as number one. I didn't put these in any particular ranking, but it's up there, is how solid are your supplier relationships? And what I mean by that is, how well do you get along? How well do you know your supplier? How well do you know their capabilities, what they can do? And that becomes important. You need to be able to trust your suppliers and connect with them in a way that they're willing to work with you. When it comes to supplier development and developing your suppliers, if they don't like you, They're not going to do anything for you. And so you have to have that connection. And that's where I think, the older people going out, newer people coming in, a connection is more than a text or an email. That's why I say picking up the phone is so important. You've got to make that personal connection. So how does someone diagnose that? Well, someone walking down the hall, they might just ask some questions about a supplier. They say, how's the capacity going? The capacity issue going with the widget company. Do they have any process issues? Or even ask even farther, what are the processes that the part goes through? Are you thinking about any new business with the supplier? If so, where do those negotiations stand, and what are you doing about it? Just diving deeper into the what I'll call just a lot of the relationship type issues that would come up when you're trying to deal with a supplier.
All right. Do you have a story you could share, or maybe an example of, something I'd be looking for as evidential or, scenario, like a bit more in terms of assessing, the degree to which we're being effective with that?
Yeah. An assessment's a little, that's a little tougher, but I do have an example. I was working with a company in South Louisiana, small company. They had this complex, like, we're small and the suppliers don't care about us. And I was amazed at what they did. They treated their suppliers like royalty. When the suppliers would come to visit, they'd take them out fishing, they'd take them up to New Orleans. I mean, they would just treat them as wonderful guests. And the suppliers liked them. So when it comes down to, is this company going to get the parts, or are you going to get the parts? Even if the supplier is beholden to a larger company, they're going to do their best to get you their parts because they like you. If they don't like you, forget it. If they like you, there's a good chance you'll get the parts. They might be late, who knows? But there's a big difference in their attitude towards you when they feel appreciated and when they enjoy your company.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for the diagnostics. And now we'll pivot now, get into, what do you do? And so now let's pretend that, we've done the assessment. We've determined, we have some gaps to close here. We need to really improve our capabilities, both for our people and our organization. It could even extend, Greg, I'm seeing a lot of activities out there around teaching suppliers how to be good development of their suppliers, right?
Yeah.
So it often transcends just inside my own four walls. Sometimes we have to actually go and teach our suppliers how to improve their supplier performance management. So this advice is good for anybody, whether, you're a company that makes the stuff or you buy from companies that make stuff and have, complex supply chains. This is just good advice from an implementation perspective or the tactical actions we might take. So let's pivot to that. Let's talk about what do we go do to get these problems under control. I think we could start with, around that whole communications and performance thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, you have to define for a supplier what you mean by on-time delivery. What does on-time mean to you? As I said, some people might say, well, it can be as early as you want, but just don't be late. If I were to ask you, how do you define on time, and everybody watching this, what they consider to be on time, I think everybody's going to have a different definition. And it's the same with your supply base. If you don't define it, they're going to just assume what it is. My go-to is 5 days early, 1 day late. That's getting kind of strict. Sometimes it's 3 days early, 1 day late. If you're really just the just-in-time type thing, it could be 2 weeks early, 2 days late. And people ask me, well, why the late? Late's not good. Well, what if they shipped it on time and it arrived on your dock late in the day and your receiving people didn't get to it? They don't receive it until the next day. It's such a pain in the neck to have to go back and try to fix all that paperwork. So just let your system take care of it. If it's a day late, it's probably not a big deal as long as you know it's on its way. So that's the expectation, making sure that they understand what on time means. The second part of that is making sure that they understand the goal. As far as the supplier is concerned, their goal is 100% on-time delivery and on-time 100% quality. And I get a lot of incredulous looks when I say that. Well, they say, well, that's impossible. Well, as you know, there are thousands of companies that are able to do that, first of all. So it's not impossible. But you have to look at your company as a whole. Your average might be 95%, but you still expect that supplier to have 100% on-time delivery. There's a quote from Vince Lombardi that I like, and I'll paraphrase because I don't know it exactly, but he said something to the effect that perfection is impossible, but it's that journey to perfection that creates excellence. And you need to instill that sense of excellence within the supply base. If you say 90% is the goal and that's good enough, they're going to perform to that. And
if I could butt in another little thing that I've heard that I don't know what's the originator of it, and it kind of goes back to that, days or weeks early and a day or two late to give you a little bit of a window. So the notion is perfection is the enemy of good. So are we really after perfection? Well, do we need perfection?
Yeah.
Or do we need good? And so with respect to on-time delivery, maybe good is okay, right, within those parameters, and perfection can be defined as, within the bucket. When you get to quality, maybe it's a different standard.
Oh, absolutely. After working in the aerospace industry, I had a real rude awakening as to the importance of quality. When you come from a heavy manufacturing industry, and then you go to aerospace, boy, I tell you what, the quality standards in aerospace are just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So the third point in terms of setting expectations is to make sure that you set the correct expectations within your own company. So let's say you're at 90% on-time delivery and your goal is to be at 98. So you want to bump up against world-class performance. And your goal next year is 94%. And so when the supplier says to you, hey, what's your on-time delivery goal? You only have one answer. It's 100%. Your internal goal might be 94%, but the goal is always, in terms of suppliers, 100%. So I want to make that distinction because I've heard so many employees, when they're talking to their suppliers, talk about their own goals and portraying them as what the supplier needs to do. And that you just can't do that. You've got to keep that internal.
Okay, very good. So how about the second diagnostic where you're getting into, collaboration and performance tracking? What would be the things that you would do to go implement and start closing that gap?
Yeah. So we talked about it a little bit already, is verbally discuss the results. And this is presuming that you have some type of tracking system in place. I have yet to see a tracking system that meets my expectations, but you can get 90% of it. And if it doesn't do all those things you want to do, you can always download it into an Excel spreadsheet, and manipulate the data there if you need to. You were going to say something, Ron?
Yeah. Do you have a template for that you might give to somebody if they were trying to get something started?
Well, in terms of systems, it's really just the system comparing the due date with the actual delivery, and it cranks out the numbers.
Yeah.
In terms of quality, that usually comes from somebody. That's usually a manual type of thing within your system that you're defecting out a certain part, and again, your system will automatically calculate that. The problem comes in with exceptions, and I mentioned that earlier. So here's an example of an exception. You have an order for 50. The supplier can't get you all 50, but they send in 25, and that 25 arrives on time. So you need to establish your rule. Is the order late, the order of 50, or is only 25 late? Right? That's especially important if you're working with parts per million versus orders. I like working parts per million. It kind of equalizes everybody. It makes a big difference. Or, for example, another exception. What if you drop an order inside of lead time? And that supplier's busting their butt to get you that part. And they say, we'll have it to you by next Wednesday. Well, Wednesday comes around and that part's not there. It doesn't arrive till Friday. What do you do? Is it late? They didn't meet their expectation, but sure, they sure went above and beyond to get it to you. What do? So those are the types of rules that you really need to examine up front. If you don't do that, every buyer is going to do it differently. It won't be consistent.
Yeah, so I'd like to circle back. You said something important earlier about, supplier management systems and processes.
Yeah.
And you said that, there's nothing out there that gets more than 90% of what you're looking for. Maybe you can just take a moment and talk more about, if you're looking at, good supplier performance management tracking system, what would be the top, what are the things you would want to check the box? It better do this, it better do this, it better do that. What would good look like?
Yeah.
A solution.
Good for me is that it can, first of all, it automatically tracks the due date to the actual delivery date. And, that's pretty common. I think the more difficult thing is how does a system let you take care of those exceptions? Going back to that order of 50 and they got 25 to you on time, does the system let you split that up? Can you go in and say, look, 25 were on time, even though the order was late, it shows up as 50 late in terms of the PO. Does it easily let you split that up without you having to go back and actually create a separate PO and say that was on time? Oh my gosh, talk about a waste of money. So those are the types of things. The exceptions on the quality side, boy, just having something that you can add some notes is always helpful, that you can actually see what the quality issues are. Again, it goes back to with exceptions. What do you do? If a part comes in and it's defective, but the supplier comes in on their own dime and fixes it and takes care of that problem, is it still a quality issue?
Right. So that begs the question is whether you would advocate for some kind of corrective action tracking mechanism in there and some kind of reporting for that too, or would that be driven out of the quality management system, or would you want to have that more in the supplier performance management, or both?
So it depends. Boy, that's a loaded answer, isn't it? If you have a really good relationship with that supplier and you know that they work hard on trying to correct their stuff, doing what I'll say a formal corrective action process to me is busy work, and it creates a lot more workload on the buyer or the quality person. I think it's the Ford system. There's this eight.
Yeah, AD, what they call the AD, right?
Boy, that really gets down into the weeds. I mean, they just do a bang up job of, is this thing really corrected? And I think in most cases, you don't need something like that. I mean, it's got to be really, really major to get into that kind of detail. I've had managers who said, hey, we're going to do 8D for everything. And, you'll spend your whole day working on that stuff because you've got problems here and there. And it's getting those really particular difficult answers that are hard to get out of the supplier. So the part was late. Well, the machine went down for a day. Their machining center went down. That's why it was late. Well, if you start insisting, well, why did the machine go down? Do you have a corrector? Did you have a preventative maintenance program and all that? I think you're starting to really get into a lot of the detail of running their business. And that's where I think you have to draw the line. You don't want to run their business, but you want to be an expert enough to know that you might be able to make some suggestions. So as you're doing a plant tour next time, say, hey, do you have a preventative maintenance program? You don't have to tie it to that part, but you can ask the question. And if they do, and it's robust, and then you think, okay, well, the machine just broke down. It just happened, right? So I'm an advocate for corrective measures when necessary.
Okay.
But otherwise, I think it adds quite a burden for both so the buyer and the supplier.
Okay. Cool. Anything else around feedback and collaboration before we pivot to that third area?
No, I think that covers it.
Right. Perfect. So now I think we'll pivot now to what do we do if we determine we have a gap in relationships with our suppliers? What would be the actions you'd want to develop the skills for the organization, your people, maybe even with your suppliers? What would be those?
Yeah. So number one in my book is empathy. Always treat that supplier with respect. I mean, always. So, you're getting pounded by manufacturing, you're getting pounded by marketing, the parts are late, the supplier's not holding up their commitment. The last thing you want to do is get on the phone and start yelling at them. It's human nature. People help people who they like. So yelling at a supplier, especially if it's the salesperson who doesn't have anything to do with manufacturing, it's not going to help. Let me take a look at my notes here. What else I had? Oh, yeah. So the question is, do the suppliers dislike you? Are they indifferent, or they really like you? Not liking you and being indifferent, probably in the same boat. But if they like you, then they're probably more than likely doing everything they can to help you anyway. So yelling and not treating them with respect. The other thing is, if they come in for a plant tour, are you treating them as important? Are you greeting them at the door? Is the conference room ready to go? Or is there someone in there you have to boot out? Do you have to spend 15 minutes getting the projector to work? Or is it all ready to go? Is the safety equipment all ready for the plant tour? And when all that happens, the supplier feels important. And so it doesn't mean you can't have those uncomfortable conversations. I don't know that I've ever had a supplier visit where we haven't sat down and had uncomfortable conversations, but you have to do it with respect. And in terms of that empathy thing, I'm probably going to say here today, probably one of the most controversial things in this podcast today. And that will be, what do you know about your immediate contact at the supplier? Are they married? Do they have kids? Do they have a dog? When's their birthday? And I get some people saying, well, I'm not going to mix business and personal relationships. Well, I'm here to tell you that that is business. And you're not trying to butter up that person. It's about caring about that person. And it goes a long way towards forming a solid relationship that gets results for your business. And I think it's very important when you get that pushback to say, no, it is business. And you don't have to be their best friend, but acknowledge them not as a supplier, but as a person. And I guarantee that will pay huge, huge dividends for you in the months and years to come. Okay, second thing is trust. Do they trust you? That's a biggie. And you could come right out and ask them, have that difficult conversation. First of all, do you trust the supplier? Maybe the parts are always late and you tell the supplier, I don't trust that your parts are going to be here on time. Or the other way around, your POs every week are changing, going all over the place. And they say, we don't trust that you need what you say you need. And so we're not sure what to make. And so trust is really an important aspect of that relationship. And finally, connection. Back on trust, I wanted to mention, never cry wolf. Just never cry wolf. If you need parts, if you got an order of 50 parts coming in, but you only need 5, don't tell them that you need 50. They're not stupid, because they're trying to do the same thing you are. They're juggling multiple customers. Tell them you need 5. I need 5 by next Friday. I need another 5 after that. And if you get me that, they're going to be late, but we're going to keep running. And you have that collaborative discussion. Finally, with connection, it goes back to what do you know about the supplier? And that's what I think we're losing. We're losing a lot of that connection with people retiring. How well are you connected to the supplier's businesses and processes? Do you know their concerns? Do you know the constraints that they have? Do you know their capacity issues? another question is, how important are you as a customer? Are you a little fish or a big fish? If you're a little fish, then those personal relationships become even more important. And in terms of processes and knowing the processes, my gosh, YouTube is your friend. There's not a process out there that I haven't found yet.
Really?
So if you are a new buyer to casting, for example, go out and watch a YouTube video on casting. You'd be amazed. And you'd be amazed at how many casting videos or how many casting processes there are. So you got to go back to the supplier and say, what's the process you're using with that casting? And they'll say it's sand casting. Then you will go back and watch another video and you find out all the problems that there are and the difficulties in making a sand cast. And then you'll start to understand why you're getting these castings in with porosity issues and all those types of things. You really start to empathize with the supplier, with the problems that they have, and you become an ally in helping to solve those problems.
Exactly. Very interesting. All right, cool. Anything else around this particular area around connection?
No, I think that does it. I think that, again, between the expectations, discussing the results, and then having that collaboration, that the empathy, again, it just makes huge dividends. It's hard for me to look back at my career and think when it has not been helpful. It's a difference between a supplier telling you to go pound sand and saying, "Hey, come on, let's talk about it."
Okay. Yeah. Well, any concluding comments before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it. I think that does wrap it up. Just saying that, stick to the basics. There are so many, you can get into supplier development programs and getting in and helping your supplier and all that. That's great. I think all those things are wonderful. There's so many things that you can do with supplier development. But if you don't get the basics right and you're not strong with the basics, then all that other stuff is fluff.
Right. Difficult to execute at best. Yeah. Difficult to do at best.
Yep, absolutely. Difficult to execute.
All right, cool. So, Greg, you shared a lot of really good stuff with us. I really love that YouTube tip. I never thought about that. It's one of the things I'm really enjoying about hosting these podcasts. It's just little hacks and tricks, that have developed over time. Yesterday, Jeff was doing a podcast with Jeff Burris, and he was talking about how we leverage AI in purchasing around just getting educated and pulling together information quickly to understand the basis for cost on something. And that just didn't exist when I worked in purchasing. I mean, that wasn't just, what are you talking about? We had to do it in the old-fashioned way, just giving out books and actually getting educated or going to have to visit the suppliers to learn anything.
Yeah.
It's really changed. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, to pick your brain, ask for ideas, engaging for help, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say there's two main avenues for that, Ron. One would be via LinkedIn. I'm out on LinkedIn. And the other way would just be to contact the MetaOps folks. I'm sure you guys would be more than happy to pass along their information to me. And do it that way. So either way is fine with me. I'm good with that. Yep.
Right. Awesome. Well, Greg, thank you for joining me. You did a fantastic job. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Ron. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.